Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 8. We'll present about our material. But the first, let me introduce our members. First, Ria Puspita Dewi. Second, Yunia Sapitri. And third, Vidya Dwandriani. Okay, I will explain my first material. Evaluating learner achievement. So, in the first material, has the three most important: evaluation, assessment, and measurement. I will explain one by one. Evaluation. Evaluation refers to the process for determining the success level of individual or product based on data and making decisions on this success level. 2. Assessment refers to procedures or techniques used to obtain data about a learner or product. 3. Measurement refers to the data collected, which are typically expressed quantitatively. For example, numbers. The physical devices that are used to collect the data are referred to as instruments. For example, rating scales, forms, observation sheets, checklists, objective tests. Okay, for the next material, the purpose of evaluation. A properly designed and implemented evaluation provides an instructional designer with appropriate data that can be analyzed to determine the success level of whom or what is being evaluated. Okay, next, the goal of learner evaluation. Instructional goals describe more specific outcomes of what a learner should be able to demonstrate once instruction has been completed. An effective and appropriate learner evaluation is based directly on the instructional goals and objectives. Next, developing learner evaluation. The development of a learner evaluation begins with examining the instructional goals and objectives that were created of the needs and task analysis. Is it a change in learner knowledge, skill, or attitude? In addition, the instructional designer determines how success of a learner will be judged. Okay, that's all my material. For the next,
I'm Yunia Sapitri. Okay, I will continue the material from Ria. I will explain the material, a change in knowledge until conducting a learner evaluation. The first, a change in knowledge for a learner to be competent in a given field he or she must possess fundamental knowledge that relates to that field. So, for example, a nurse needs to know anatomy and psychology. Before being able to treat a patient, a mechanic needs to know the different parts of an engine before fixing it a basketball. Referees must know the rules of the game before officiating exits, because knowledge is such an important element in all fields. Being able to determine the level of knowledge a learner has is a critical part of interaction. So determining a learner's knowledge level and whether it has changed as a result of instruction is typically done through the use of either an objective or concerted response tests. These types of tests are often referred to as paper and pencil tests. Okay, the next material, the first achievement test. So achievement test is a material is divided into two parts. The first, test development, and then the second, test developing object test items. So test development. Test development is a state that answers to several questions need to be obtained before a test is developed. The combination of these answers we have an instructional designer creates a test development plan. This plan will have quite the development and eventual implementation of the test. So, of the implementation of the test, what is the purpose of the test? The second, who will be taking the test? And then third, how much time will be used for testing, and etc. You can see more clearly in often the book. So the second, developing object test items. True all false items are written as statement that a learner determines to be either correct, true, or incorrect. So the second, wait null for true false items. Use them frequently in all. For example, Los Angeles is the capital of California. The second, multiple choice items. Multiple choice systems are considered to be the most usable item used in objective tests. And then the third, matching items. With matching items, a learner is being asked to determine the relationship between two different lists of information. The last, constructor's response test. Constructed response test differs from adjective tests because the answer to question making up constructed response tests do not necessarily have one correct response. So today's constructed response tests are considered to be subjective tests and are therefore generally more difficult to score. And the major term used in constructed response test is the essay. Now, a change in skill. So the learner is being judged not only on his or her ability to meet the general skill, but also on the more precise skill that make up this general skill. It's important to note that what we are calling the general skill can be also be considered the instructional goal. Now, guidelines for evaluating a skill. The first, when evaluating a skill but. The second, when evaluating the projects, the process and the product can be evaluated. Third, when evaluating quality and quantity of the product can be assessed. Fourth, evaluate the skill, the process. The following elements can be included under the most realistic condition possible. Assessment technique, direct testing, formal ratings, observation, and anecdotal records, portfolio, and the last rubric. The first, direct testing. There are certain skills that can be directly tested to determine how well a learner can perform the skill. For example, the product. Guidelines for the direct testing process start by reviewing the task analysis result. This will help determine the step of the skill the learner will need to perform. The step will serve as the individual criteria that the learner will be evaluated on. For example, a nurse drawing blood from a patient. Perform rating a performs. Perform rating is on learner's ability to perform certain action, not on the product as is it with direct testing. Guidelines for the perform rating process as with the direct testing technique. Start by review the task analysis result. This will help determine the step of the skill the learner will need to perform. For example, applying cooking technique for making a shuffle. Now, observation and anecdotal records is developed as a result of observing a learner perform a skill. Guidelines for the anecdotal record process determine what skill the observation will focus on. This will help guide the observer during the observation. For example, observing a student teacher in her classroom. Now, portfolio is a collection of artifacts that depict a learner ability. Guidelines for the portfolio process determine what skill the portfolio will cover and over what period of the time. The skill should be directly related to instructional goals and objectives. For example, the collection of paintings from an artist. Now, rubrics. Rubric is an assessment instrument that is used to evaluate a learner based on the learner's performance of specific criteria. Next material, a change in attitude. Change in attitude, the most difficult outcome to determine whether a learner was achieved is a change in attitude. Attitudes are based on feeling, emotion, and perception, which are highly subjective, often subtle, and are very difficult to evaluate directly. Example of determining a change in attitude: a doctor's attitude toward his patients. Now, assessment technique for a change in attitude. The first, observation and anecdotal records. For determining attitude change, observation and anecdotal records work much like they do for determining whether a learner has been a change in skill. An instructor observes a learner in an authentic environment, for example, classroom, job site. The second, survey and questionnaires. Observation and anecdotal records are often not visible. Let us look at an example dealing with healthy eating. Third, self-reporting inventories. A self-reporting inventory generally consists of a series of structured questions or statements that are to be answered with yes or no. For example, I usually turn my homework on time, and finishing high school is important to me. Interview are one of the most widely used assessment techniques. The last material, conducting a learner evaluation, become three. The first, pre-instruction evaluating a learner before instruction has begun allows data to be gathered about a learner's ability related to the instructional objectives and the content that makes up the instruction. The second, during instruction evaluating during. So provided data that indicate how a learner is progressing. There are numbers assessment activities that can be used during interaction. And the last, post-interaction. Post-interaction evaluation can be considered summative evaluation because it happens at the end of instruction. Okay, that's all for my material. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, I will continue the material. Formative and summative evaluation. Formative evaluation and summative evaluation tend to focus on the instructional design process and the intervention created as a result of this process. Formative evaluation is used throughout the instructional design process to ensure that the intervention being developed is tested and revised to meet the needs of the client. As the name implies, formative evaluation is used as the intervention is forming. Summative evaluation is conducted at the end of the instructional design process to determine how successful the process was in helping meet the major goals. Summative evaluation is used to provide a summary of what occurred. Learner evaluation can be formative and summative in its approach. Learner evaluation can take place at different times during instruction, typically prior to instruction, during instruction, and after instruction has been completed. Conducting learner evaluation prior to and during instruction is formative learner evaluation because we are trying to determine how learners are progressing. Learner evaluation conducted after instruction is completed is summative learner evaluation to determine how successful a learner was. A well-designed learner evaluation will include both formative and summative elements. Next material is brain-based assessment. Brain-based education is a comprehensive approach to teaching and learning that draws heavily on current research, particularly in neuroscience, about how the brain functions and develops over time. Assessment that follows a brain-based approach will take into consideration an individual's learning style and that achievement is best demonstrated over time. Brain-based assessment often consists of various instruments that are administered to a learner over a period of time. The instruments allow for multiple measurements to be taken that can provide a holistic picture of learner achievement. This is often accomplished through the creation of a portfolio that includes artifacts that demonstrate student achievement and growth in learning. As an instructional designer, it may be difficult to approach assessment through the use of a portfolio for several reasons. The amount of time required being one of the most significant. Despite this, as an instructional designer, there are several key ideas regarding brain-based assessment you should be aware of. First, individuals learn differently. Thus, one assessment approach will not work effectively for all individuals. Second, learning is a complex process that takes place over time. Thus, true demonstration of learning achievement often requires multiple assessments administered at different times. Third, learners should be encouraged and given the opportunity to monitor their own learning. A successful learner evaluation. A successful learner evaluation is one that provides adequate data that helps those involved in the instructional intervention make decisions about what took place and what should subsequently be done. If a learner evaluation indicates that a learner was not able to meet instructional goals and objectives, then the instructor, possibly with the help of the instructional designer, will attempt to find out why. Finding out why will help establish what appropriate next steps need to take place for a learner. It could indicate that such things as remediation are needed for the learner or that the instructional materials need to be improved. If adequate data were not collected during the learner evaluation to allow for the learner to be properly evaluated, then the learner evaluation needs to be examined. If the assessment techniques were not properly implemented, inadequate data may have been collected. Those responsible for implementing the learner evaluation may need training. The instructional designer's role. The role of an instructional designer is to help create and execute a plan of action to design, develop, and implement an efficient and effective learner evaluation. An efficient and effective learner evaluation is one that provides appropriate data that help determine the success level an individual has achieved as a result of instruction. This plan of action should include the following elements. First, analyze the instructional goals and objectives. Determine the intended learning outcomes. Second, based on the instructional objectives and learning outcomes, determine the appropriate type of learner evaluation needed. Third, design and develop the appropriate assessment techniques that will be used to gather data about the learner. Fourth, assist as necessary in the implementation of the assessment techniques. This can include analyzing the data, determining if the learner have been successful, and deciding what steps need to take place based on the results of the data analysis. Evaluating learner achievement and the instructional design process. Evaluation is a process for determining the success of an individual, product, or process. Evaluating learner achievement helps to determine if the intervention created and implemented is successful in meeting the specific learning goals and objectives set out for the learner. As an instructional designer, you should be able to answer the following questions as you approach evaluating learner achievement. First, what are the goals and objectives of the intervention? Second, what data need to be gathered in order to measure whether the learning goals and objectives have been met? Third, what instruments are needed to gather this data? Fourth, are there instruments currently available or do the instruments need to be made? 5. During what phases of instruction should assessment take place? 6. What is the process for how the instrument will be administered? 7. How will the data that are gathered be used? Okay, that's all for our material. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.